Hello, welcome to the 50-minute hour. This is Corey, and today I'm joined by Calvin.
Hi, how are you all doing today? What are we drinking today, Corey?
Today I'm drinking one of my favorite whiskeys. It's a Japanese whiskey called Suntory whiskey. It has a nice, like, little umami taste. It goes very well with sushi or sashimi, or even if you've had it like 2 hours ago and you take this, it's like the taste buds just kind of light up. It's really
Are you
nice.
still working at the sushi place?
Yes, I am.
All
Yeah,
right.
I like to have this when I get off work for that reason because I'll usually have sushi or sashimi before I leave and come back here, at 2 or 3 in the morning. I'll have Suntory and a pipe and just kind of relax and listen to some jazz, Chet Baker or something. It's very nice.
Do they sell anything like that at your sushi place?
We only, as far as liquor goes, we only have sake,
Okay.
but we have a lot of like beer, wine,
All right. All
and the
right.
sake is very sake. I wouldn't say it has a intense umami flavor, but it does complement sushi and sashimi very well.
Okay. All right. So today's topic, we are going to be talking about demons. This is actually one of the most heavily asked about questions when I ask people, hey, do you have any ideas for a podcast subject? A lot of people are interested in demons. And where I go to school, University of Kentucky, I've heard several accounts from several different people about feeling or seeing what they believe to be demonic presences on campus, especially North Campus, close to the middle of Lexington. So I thought we would talk about that. What exactly are demons? If people are seeing them, what types of demons they are, and what people might do to avoid this. So if you want to start out, I'll ask just the question: what type of demons exist that we could see potentially?
I mean, you could potentially see any demon. There's a variety of reasons why one can come to interact with demons audibly, envision, whatever, noetically, which is to say, sort of like a sixth sense way.
Okay.
Demons can reveal themselves. Some people are just naturally gifted with interaction with the occult, and that's for a variety of reasons. And then sometimes God actually will reveal demons to people.
All right. So if I have a friend, because I do have a friend who says she's seen, she described a dark or several dark shadowy figures with red eyes floating above people is what she said, and that's the reason I thought we should talk about this. What type of demon would that be? Would that just are there different types of demons?
Yes, there are different
Okay.
types of demons, and they have different origins, and there's different series of falls. Like, there's not just one fall. Like that's how a lot of Christians think. There's like one fall at the beginning of creation, which is sort of like a. I think we get that from like Milton, kind of,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not biblical. It's not patristic, but that is nonetheless what most Christians think. And so there's a different series of demons, and then demons also actually, depending on which church father you ask, kind of reproduced with humans in some form. And in the West, this led to, like, through Aquinas, like ideas about succubi and incubi. If you've heard of those, and we can get that later because that's a whole can of worms. But so there's these mixtures of these souls of the Nephilim, the giants, the titans, whatever you want to call them, and when they die, which a lot of them did die during the flood, and we can talk about how they come to be exactly later on. Their souls uh, didn't really. They stayed on Earth in this realm, in this astral realm, the planetary realm. And most of the everyday demons people interact with are not the demons of the fallen angels. They're actually the souls, the spirits of the Nephilim. Um, those are the sort of, and they're like this weird human demon mixture.
Would that be the dark shadowy figures that
So
people
that's
saw?
shadow people, which is
Okay.
very common, and different people, even people who normally don't care or believe in demons, will interact with shadow people, especially in hypnagogic states.
Okay.
Hypnagogic, I think the more common, word for that is, like sleep paralysis, right?
Okay.
So in sleep paralysis, like dreams, I mentioned in an earlier podcast that dreaming, lucid dreaming, you're basically in a very minimal degree already putting your consciousness into the astral realm where the demons are visible. So basically, like in Adam, the third eye is opened, in eating the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and God had to put clothes around them, and basically the part of the deeper meaning of that is that we became aware of all the realms of existence in that state of knowledge of good and evil, which include being aware of the fallen angels and all that stuff. So that was terrifying. And um, basically, if that eye was opened, you would, as Aldous Huxley says, all the doors of perceptions became open simultaneously. You would see all these beings, mostly in the sky, but even around, like every household has, at the very least, demonic obsession, which is to say, demonic energy. But this is why Orthodox and traditional Christians bless their house every year. It's not just like a fancy, fun thing to do. It's like actually a very serious, and or any pagan household for that matter. It's not like this is a Christian idea. Like pretty much everyone except modernity believed, these spirits that some of which were malicious, are at the very least inconvenient, exist in everyday life, and they're not fun to have around. And they're just kind of everywhere basically. And if you could see them, you would be terrified because they're very disturbing looking. Some of them are just silly. And different traditions talk about the way demons manifest themselves, and demons, depending on the demon, to some level, can change forms. But they tend to, they can have very strange manifestations, or the sort of trickster demons you get, like nymphs, leprechauns, fairies, oni, some oni in Japanese. They'll do very weird things. Like the oni in Japan would present themselves, the trickster ones would present themselves as having an eye in their anus, and they would do this to scare travelers, or something like that. So you get a lot of very weird demons, and some of them might even appear more silly than scary. But in either case, you're seeing this being that you've never really had any framework to digest. So especially for secular people, that can be pretty terrifying.
Okay. Can they hurt you? The shadow people, for example, can those ones hurt you if you see
Shadow
one?
people are generally pretty innocuous. There are cases where shadow people will like cause people to breathe difficult. They can exert pressure on the chest or different
Okay.
parts of the body. So demons can manifest a level of physical emphasis. They're not purely spiritual. They're not like totally ephemeral. But the way, I mean, the laws of physics, as we know, just sort of break down in this realm. Like the way they can interchange between their interactivity with our everyday understanding of space and time, and then draw away from that, is not something we as humans are really used to. So they can go back and forth between this exertion of physical pressure. And, certain demons like the Grigori or the Watchers, which were three of the most powerful angels that fell with Lucifer. And you can read the book of Enoch for more on that. And they basically gave man technology, writing. If you read Plato's Phaedrus, he talks about this as well, with the gods giving the king of Egypt the gift of writing, and why for Plato and the Pharaoh, they saw that as basically ruining civilization. Runes from the sky fathers like Odin, basically magic, metalworking, war technology, agriculture, even all this stuff was sort of given by demons. Which is fun because you can kind of read this Unabomber esque philosophy into demonology, which is to say that demons are trying to industrialize man, to bring him about to the technological point where they can manifest themselves in a way that is, like the ultimate, from a demonic point of view, the ultimate, like having people aware of your existence can work to your advantage in so far that you can manipulate people and so on. But if the optimal state for a demon is to have humans not think of you as a otherworld, metaphysical entity, it'd be best if you could have people think of you, and so far you exist, so you can manifest yourself and make yourself look like a good being, like a god. Which is how they played with pagans for most of history. But it'd be even better if you could actually, one, sort of bring the world in a state where a vacuum of spiritualism, so like the Enlightenment, right? Modern atheism, blah, blah, blah. And then manifest yourself within a secular framework, like aliens or something.
Okay.
Because then you get the best of both worlds. And a lot of demonologists think that's ultimately what demons are working towards, is to bring about this sort of pseudo metaphysical entity manifestation, like in aliens, and then they can sort of start to control politics and da da da, and in a more overt way, and sort of, then bring back the Nephilim but in this weird scientific, pseudoscientific way where it's like, oh, you need our genes to make yourself better or more immune to COVID or whatever. And then they can start to really kick in the sort of antichrist program or whatever you want to call it. So like Seraphim Rose, he talks a lot about this in Orthodox Religion of the Future, Soul After Death, stuff like that. Um, so there's all these mechanisms by which demons exert themselves. But yeah, so shadow people, I guess, I've never heard anyone becoming seriously harmed. I had a friend who was someone who I guess just had a she was raised in a pagan Satanist family. So in situations like that, you can get people who are more sensitive to these things, and even not just able to see demons where most people can't, but actually demons can exert more control over them. And I heard she actually would get choked at times.
Okay.
Normally,
That's
they would
just
just appear and they wouldn't bother her, but I have the impression that not all shadow people have the same intentions. I mean, that's the other thing. There's different orientations and degrees with different demons, even within the same ranks of demons. So some demons don't really care much about humans. Some demons just want to play, their idea of play, which might not be very fun to us. And then other demons like they actually hate humans or they envy humans, so they want to like damn us, kill us, whatever. In in the Christian idea, demons can only exert as much control as God gives them. So
okay.
there is that.
So if you see, let's say, a shadow person, because is that the easiest to see?
For most people,
Okay.
I don't know if historically it was, but for most people, for whatever reason, in like modern Western culture, where most people don't believe in demons or aren't presumably aren't involved in the occult,
Yeah.
aren't taking hallucinogenics, shadow people seem to be the most everyday, easy demon for those people to experience and interact with.
So if you see one, what should you do? Just ignore it, or like should you do anything if you see one? Because I imagine I haven't ever seen one, but I imagine if you would, it'd be very scary, especially if
If it was your
you,
first time, yeah.
especially if you don't believe in that sort of thing and you just see
Well,
a
I've
shadowy.
known like atheists, very intelligent atheists who teaches chemistry at University of Kentucky. Um, and most atheists I just kind of find kind of cringy and annoying, but he was actually pretty, I think, much more rational. But he once told me that he had seen something that would be described as a demon, and it was actually choking him. It was like on his chest while he was laying down in a park. And he told me that it was a very real and weird experience for him because he doesn't believe in these things. And I asked him, "So, do you believe in demons now?" And he said, "Well, no, I just have to pass it up as a weird psychological experience that I have no explanation for, but I'm not going to suddenly change my worldview for it," which I respect. It kind of reminds me of Thomas Nagel, the philosopher who wrote "What Is It Like to Be a Bat?" Who's another atheist I respect a lot. And he said, I'm not of this, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically says, I'm not of this haughty illusion that my atheism has anything to do with philosophical reason. I'm an atheist because for me to not be an atheist would dramatically change my worldview and therefore my habits and how I have to act. And they're habits that I'm very attached to that I don't want to change. But I appreciate this intellectual honesty of these sorts of people. So yeah, if you have that worldview and you see this sort of shadow person, I think most people will just pass it off to psychological
Okay.
um, projection or impetus or whatever. And if you read psychological reports of hypnagogic stasis, it's definitely how the vast majority of psychologists will interpret it.
Some psychological. But if you do see one and do think it is truly there, should you just ignore it? Or like, what would happen if you approached it? Would it be more tempted to interact with you?
It depends. I mean,
Okay.
again, the demons are very different. Some of them appear without even wanting to appear to you. They might not have no interest in you. Some of them maybe are trying to play with you, cause you anxiety, cause you to commit suicide.
Okay.
So it's definitely not it's not a gamble you want to. I mean, a lot of the occult, the left hand occult, is like purposely trying to get in touch with demons. This is like what the O9A, the Order of Nine Angles, will do, for example, and actually using them to exert control over people. Lesser Key of Solomon, stuff like that. So Ouija board, another example. As I said in another podcast too, like the way a lot of people use tarot, although often
Mhm.
unbeknownst to them, the sort of way of actually using demons to give you knowledge, which is mancy. That's where like necromancy, scrying, all that stuff comes from. Is this using the occult, which is say these demonic occult spirits, to give you knowledge of things.
Okay. Huh. So I have a friend who he also heard about people seeing shadow people on campus, and he says he doesn't believe it because he would have to see it for himself to believe it, and he actually wants to see one now because he wants to know if they're real.
Well, you have to think of perspective from a demon. Again, what I was saying earlier, it's to their advantage if you don't believe in them.
Okay.
So if someone is wanting to seek out a demon, I mean, demons they tend to work in clans and they work together. So they're constantly spying on people.
So do they have some sort of free will like we
Yes,
do?
yeah,
Okay,
they
they
do.
do.
And they're constantly watching people, looking at people, so they know if you're seeking them out. And unless in a certain case, like where you want to do some sort of magic or like and you're serious about it, right? If you're just some skeptic who wants to believe in demons by seeing one, well, it's not really to the economy of a demon to show. They prefer you don't believe
There's
in
no
them.
reason for
Right.
them to.
I mean, now that being said, I've heard of cases where you have people. Again, it's very hard to predict because demons have very different intentions.
Okay.
Um, but I've heard of skeptics who want to seek demons and eventually do find that. But usually, most of the time, and from what I've heard, it usually involves getting into the occult. It's not usually a skeptic who just wants to see a demon and that's it. Because demons gain things out of human interaction. They can. That's kind of like where the make a deal with the demon comes from, like the sort of Faustian archetype, which isn't exactly how it's portrayed in movies or literature, but there's truth to that. And so there is an advantage in that case for a demon to show themselves. Even so far, they're losing out on this. Well, we lost a skeptic, but now we gain someone that we can gain power.
So they may make you go further to see them than
Yes.
just looking
Yes.
around at night or
Yes.
something.
So if you're just a skeptic looking for a demon, you're probably not going to get it.
You'd be at a lower chance than someone who does believe in them, possibly.
Probably. I mean,
Okay.
this is
Huh.
also like why, for example, like if you go to Africa or so-called unculture, which I always love because to me it's like you have this sort of woke political ideology nowadays where it's like, oh, we're so white imperialist and we can't, force our culture. But then it's also, most of the time, most woke people are like agnostic, atheist, or very secular. But then it's like, oh, all these unenlightened people who still believe in demons. I'm just like, well, what exactly are you saying? Like, are white people so superior because we don't believe in the spiritual realm anymore? Right?
Okay.
It puts them in a very awkward position. Either you admit that all these so-called, primitive people are primitive because they believe in demons, or white people are evil and everything we do is terrible, including our secularism, and that we should, go back to what even white people used to believe, but or European, whatever word you want to use, which is to say that there is a spiritual world. It's very real and exerts a very real, effect on everyday existence.
Now another side of that, a lot of people, religious and non-religious, secular, they have accounts of sleep paralysis where they see sleep paralysis demons, and you can even look it up, and
Mhm.
that's something that happens when you have sleep paralysis. You see these things, and a lot of people don't think of them as demons or spiritual things. But are those demons, or is that just some psychological?
Yeah. Well, this goes back to what I said in the podcast earlier with dreams or,
Mhm.
or especially lucid dreams. It's like, are schizophrenics, which is to say, what they're seeing is subjective, like a Rorschach test, right? But what that Rorschach is a real piece of paper with a real ink blot. So the way one person in a hypnagogic state experiences a being here may be different than another person given the same situation. But what they're seeing is there most of the time. It's not
Okay.
purely psychological, ex nihilo. It's not out of nothing that they have this sudden. And that demon or spirit or entity might manifest itself differently to that person's individual psychology. Because again, demons don't really have this black and white connection with our everyday time space in the way we're used to. So there's a level of you're very rarely seeing an entity, a spiritual entity, as it actually is. Even angels hide themselves. God in his theophanies sort of veils himself, right? And this is something that all the spiritual things tend to have concurrency on. They don't want you to see them as they are for different reasons, but um, so the way someone in hypnagogic state is interacting with that entity is subjective, but it is objective. It's a subjective apprehension of the objective. Um, so something is really there. It might not be how it's showing itself, though.
Okay. Now you mentioned last podcast that you're working on a movie with a demonologist. Do you want to
Yes.
explain a bit what a demonologist is?
Yeah.
The practice of that.
Well, it can vary. So in the old days, a demonologist was basically an exorcist. In the East, that was usually an abbot or a monk. Um, in the West, what happened is that it became more and more scholastic and sort of like its own study in the university. It was written down, which in many ways you could argue led to the Enlightenment because the East never really writes down its demonology. This is something that we pass on orally because it's very dangerous knowledge, like especially with the French, who for whatever reason, I think God gives every nation or people a certain gift. And I think he gave the French the gift of exorcism, the gift of demonology. But the French made the mistake of writing all this down on paper. And when the universities got secularized, you had all these people who weren't really interested in leading a holy religious life who start to learn all these names of actual demons that, because demons will, under certain circumstances in an exorcism, reveal their name. And once you know the name of a demon, I mean, it varies. There's a lot of generalizations here, but generally you have some higher level of interaction with it. And so people were writing grimoires or collections of demonic names or aliases. And, these people were getting into a cult, and then they started using these grimoires to actually summon demons, and they weren't using it to exorcise demons. They were using it to actually work with demons in the demonic economy. So there's multiple economies. There's a divine economy, a human economy. This isn't the macroeconomics they teach in university, right? And there's a demonic economy, and then the demons have their own. It's kind of like the way most people imagine conspiracy theorists is also the way people imagine demons, which is like it's a bunch of people who are all in agreement, in total agreement, working around a round table. And it's like neither actual historical conspiracies are like that, and neither are the demons like that. Like they have different intentions and they disagree with each other. There's infighting. It's not this organized hierarchical kingdom of order. There's its own system of exchange within the demonic economy and how that interacts with the human economy. And it's also like economics insofar, unlike economics insofar that if you're studying human economics, the way if you're actively studying, think about it, then the way you start to buy and exchange goods, you think about it differently than people who don't. The same way if you study psychoanalysis, you think about human interaction in a way differently than most people who don't. So whereas with magic or demons, my point is like with economics, you can stop studying economics and stop thinking about it, and it's not really going to affect you anymore. It recedes. It's not like that with the occult, with magic or with demons. Like once you've entered into that economy, it's very, very, very difficult to get out of it. You sort of scarred yourself. Once there's a more or less a natural, people call it orgone or whatever. There's like a natural force field, AT field in Neon Genesis that sort of protects you from that realm. But once you like take enough drugs usually like hallucinogenics can temporarily decrease it, but if you take enough, it can actually acidically, actually erode it permanently. Do occult rituals, murder. These things actually break down that natural barrier and actually put you in a state where you're more susceptible to demonic influence. This would be very controversial, but I actually think this is a part of what post-traumatic stress disorder from military, because basically you're just someone who's ruthlessly killing all these people. And that actually has a permanent effect on that barrier. And you become much more susceptible to demonic influence. So you get put under all this psychological stress and anxiety. And that's another thing. I mean, just intense depression, anxiety, which are usually caused in many cases by demons, sort of corroborating with other things going on in your actual, human economy life. But once that force field is breaking down, then you can, that you've broken into that world you've seen in the beyond, and it's really
you can't undo it.
It's a point of no return.
Okay.
Which is why it's very dangerous to interact with the occult, because it's not something you can just go back on, especially if you get really deep in it. I mean, I've known people who were involved in the occult, and the reason they ended up becoming Catholic or Orthodox or whatever wasn't even so much they really believe in it. They just ran away to the church as a sanctuary. They go to confession, take Eucharist, not even in the sense that they're seeking salvation or they really think Jesus is God. They just understand that it works pragmatically, because they know if they stop doing that, then they spent so much time of their life in the occult, they've damaged that barrier. And the church and the graces of the church, whatever the sort of magic they think Christians have, is the only thing protecting them from sort of getting the mafia, the demon mafia tracking them down, right? So, I mean, demons will haunt you, and they'll they're terrorists, psychologically, spiritually. They'll drive you insane. They'll cause you to kill people, I think a lot of school shootings probably come from these things too, or
So
just
they
shootings
would
in general.
use the church as like when the police put people in the alternate identity, have them go to a new city with a new name to hide them from organized crime.
Kinda, yeah.
Okay. So you think do you think a lot of the mental illness we have now is caused by the demons? With anxiety and depression, as you mentioned, is extremely common now.
Yeah.
Suicide rates are very high. You think that is caused by the demons?
Yes, I mean, yes and no. I only say yes and no because I don't want to oversimplify and overgeneralize these things.
Okay.
I mean, I studied psychology, so I know these things are very complicated.
Yeah.
But my answer would be so in the same way in Orthodoxy we say humans become energized by God. There's also demonic energy. I mean, St. Paul even talks about this, but you really miss it unless you're reading it in the Greek. But you can become demonically energized. And the thing is that God energizes not just people, but the world. And the world itself can also be energized by demons. So it's not like a demon comes along and touches you and now you have a mental illness,
Okay.
right? It's much more, there's a chain of effects.
When you're surrounded by it, you kind of absorb the energy.
Yes.
Almost?
I mean,
Okay.
modernity itself is just infected with demonic energy. The modern society itself, in a way that even pagans weren't really able, like not like decent pagans, like I'm talking about like pagans who are knee deep in like demonic sacrificial, like Aztecs or whatever, some African tribes, South American tribes, um, that are really tied into the darker aspect of occult practice. Not even really they were able to attain in their sort of societies. Secular modern society has been able, by degrees, um, much more infested with demonic energy. The sort of plythy, Christendom we have remaining is not really the sort of Christian that protects you from these things. This is a desacramentalized Christendom. So we're just sort of rampaged by demonic energy nowadays. And again, it's not like a demon is coming directly up to you and giving you some mental illness, but everything we interact with is energized demonically nowadays in a festering degree. We're wounded in this demonic pus coming out of everything. So it's very, very difficult to avoid getting infested with that energy.
Okay. So your friend, the demonologist, his job would not only be to understand demons, but would be to remove them, or
Right. So I'm sorry, I didn't get to that point. So my point with France is that it became so secularized and academic. And so you have demonologists like my friend who are more on the academic. I mean, he's an actual professor. He teaches at a university. He does work with exorcists, which are usually priests or monks.
So they're different things. Okay.
Well, traditionally, no, but nowadays, yes.
Okay.
And I mean, you could have a demonologist who's a total atheist, right?
Okay.
Right. So, but then there are the demonologists who actually are exorcists. And again, in the East, at least, these tend to be monks or abbots, not usually people too involved in the world because there's a lot of danger with that. And a demonologist is just someone who studies demons. And you could, again, be an atheist, a secular person who studies the history of demons, the sociological effects of what people think about demons have on society. I mean, you could do all these, because whether or not you believe in demons, the fact that people do believe in them exerts a real influence on the world, right? So you could be someone who just studies demonology from that perspective. But then there are people who study demons academically who do believe in demons, like my friend, Nathan Jacobs, right? So there's a lot of variety within this field, right? And then you have the demonologists who actually, put that into a pragmatic use.
So does he do any exorcisms or no?
Not he himself.
Okay, but
generally you only want priests to do that. It's not absolutely necessary. I mean, a village idiot could do an exorcism. The power of the name of Christ itself, of Jesus Christ itself, has an effect on exorcising demons.
Okay.
Or even sacramentals like holy water, holy oil, stuff like that. I actually have a friend who he lives in New York and he's an exorcist. He's not a priest. He's not even really he's very syncretist in his religious views. But basically, so you have occult people and they're doing things and something goes wrong and their pet bird gets possessed or the furniture gets possessed or a friend gets possessed.
How would you know something's possessed?
Well, we'll look into that
Okay.
later. That's a bit more complicated. But I'm just
Okay.
giving an example of what my friend here does. This is another demonologist friend
Okay.
of mine. And, you're an occult person. You don't want to get involved with the church or Muslims or Jews or whatever. So what you do is you hire someone who's not affiliated with the church or any sort of religious organization. And this person just studies all sorts of beliefs and finds out what works and what doesn't against certain demons. So that's what my friend does. He's basically an exorcist for people not involved in organized religion. So he's told me a lot of very interesting stories, and he tells me he uses a variety of methods from African religions, from South American religions, because every pagan culture has its own exorcism
Mhm.
ritual. And Plato also talks about this in Phaedrus with Pharmakon. Basically, you use one demon to cast others out. This is sort of what's radical about the Christian idea of exorcism, which is that you're not using a demon to cast other demons out. That was sort of always the working mechanism in exorcism in pagans. Um, anyway, so he said that he's not orthodox. I mean, he would say he is, but he's also like Muslim and Islam or Jewish and everything else, right? So he's not like orthodox, but he said in his experience, the most effective sealant he has had in his exorcist practices is Orthodox holy oil. He would use Catholic and holy water and oil, but he said it just wasn't very effective. He found pagan stuff more effective than
Really?
that. But he said the
Huh.
Orthodox holy oil, when it comes to sealing, which is a specific process in the exorcism, usually at the very end, where you're sealing a person to make sure that the demons don't enter in again. And he said that in his experience, the holy oil from Orthodox churches was the most effective out of any sacrament from pagan or any other Christian group he used. Um, but yeah, so yeah, just give you an example of two very different sorts of
Yeah.
demonologists that I've known.
Okay.
Yeah.
How if you don't mind me asking, how did he get into that career?
He just got he's always been very interested in religion, and he came from a wealthy family where he did his he was enrolled in a boarding school, but he did everything like online.
Okay.
So he just traveled a lot, and he traveled to India and all these other places and became fascinated with religion.
Interesting.
And he learned about all these views of spirits and demons that exist in pretty much every culture outside of modern West. And he started getting involved in the occult and realized it was very dangerous and had to learn how to get rid of demons himself. And he just realized he can make money off of it by he lives in New York City. There's lots of occult people there
Yeah.
that don't want anything to do with the church. So he became of use to them.
So he's like a third party
Yeah.
contractor almost.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Now you have in off camera and in other podcasts, you have mentioned that Lexington, Kentucky has a very strong presence of this, especially center point of Lexington. Have you yourself seen these demons that people have described?
No, I do not see demons.
Okay, you haven't.
No.
Okay.
I mean, not in this. I've been in like astral states before.
So in astral states.
and I've seen stuff there, right? But I've never just been like in a waking everyday experience in a demon. I've seen a demon. I've just been
Okay.
around lots of people who have.
Okay.
And I've seen effects of demons,
All
but
right.
I don't have the gift of actually seeing them.
Huh. Do you know what cases we've talked about this a little off camera, why people would be more prone to it?
Yeah, there's lots of reasons.
Okay.
People who have a history of hallucinogenics
Okay.
are actually during a hallucinogenic state. And that goes back to the field. Also, Cambianism, which is basically, and this is an idea in the West, it's not really much in the East, but people think people like Merlin, Rasputin were Cambians. And Cambian is someone who they're not on the state of Nephilim, but it's someone who, like a succubus or incubus, corrupted the seed of some male and then infused that in the insemination of a woman. So it's not like they're creating a human seed ex nihilo. They still need a male seed, succubus, incubus, whatever. And then they actually put that into a woman, and that impregnates them. And those people, you can also get, so there's this aspect where you're born into already having that field degenerated. And then there's also people who, out of familial curses, people whose family was involved in the Masons, who did certain oaths that have a curse on the rest of their lineage, and people who have family curses. I mean, all these things are very real, and that can actually affect multiple generations down the line. We inherit the sins of the father, right? As the Old Testament says. And what that doesn't mean like you inherit the guilt. That's kind of how Augustine in the West takes it. That actually means you inherit the effects of sin. And the effects of sin include, the wages of sin, literally death, but the effects of sin also include very much so this entering into the demonic economy.
Okay.
And that can carry on to generations. And it's not like a black and white logical game. It's a bit chaotic. It might skip generations, like even like similar to how actual genetics work. You get a total normie father and then a son who's just like born seeing demons, right? And children in general seem to also be more perceptive of the occult, not just in the bad, like the good occult too, like angels and stuff.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of accounts of people like watching baby monitors and the babies start pointing at things and seeing things. And that's this friend who originally said she saw the shadow person, said that her sister, when they were little, would see angels in their house.
And I mean, that could also just be demons. Demons
Okay.
love to parade themselves as angels, Jesus. Like whenever I hear somebody who says like, "Oh, I had this dream or vision where Christ came to me," it's like I normally just off the bat assume it's probably a demon.
Really?
Yeah. Most of the time, especially Christ, they do not reveal themselves that way generally. This is why the church fathers say like if you ever have a vision of a saint or especially of Christ, you should just assume it's a demon.
Just
Because if
assume.
God is actually trying to contact you, he will do so in other ways eventually. God will not be angry if you assume it's a demon. And this is usually how demons work. They again, especially with people who believe in the spiritual realm, demons play off prelest. They play off pride, vainglory. And that's basically to say that demons want, especially pious people, they want to appeal to their sensibilities of like, oh, I've been granted this gift to interact with Jesus or Mary or the angels or the saints or whatever. That's something very much a demon will want to play off of, which got very carried away. The West, you'll see in its like older tradition has this skepticism of any sort of spiritual interaction, which is good. That's what Orthodoxy, the East, has always encouraged. But then, especially with the Jesuits, especially with their Saint Ignatius of Loyola, who encouraged these very imaginative and like the probably more than anything else, the church fathers warn against, fornication, whatever, pride, and this is really just the outgrowth of the pride is imagination. And you do not have an encouragement of imagination in the spiritual life in the East. And in the West, this starts to get really out of hand after scholasticism and Ignatius of Loyola. And that sort of just it's kind of funny because Protestants always see themselves as like going against all the innovations of the Catholic Church. But if you actually look at Christian history, Protestants took more of the innovations out of the Catholic Church than they really went against because most Protestants are very much into this sort of imaginary prayer life, which is totally foreign to traditional Christianity. This was not the prayer practice of traditional Christians. And you can very easily become subject to prelest with that and like seeing Jesus or the angels or whatever, any of that sort of stuff.
That's dangerous.
It's very dangerous.
Okay.
Yeah. You're better off if you just have a demon showing itself to you as it is, which almost never happens either. Demon, and they'll play different games with different people. If you believe in aliens, they'll show themselves to you. And in fact, if you look at the effects of an alien abduction and compare it to demonic possession, the aftermath, it's very similar, right? And this is how people like Seraphim Rose to conclude that they're literally just demons. Demons will form themselves to whatever mythology you believe in. If that's science, if that's Christianity, if that's some sort of paganism, New Age stuff. Demons love to play on the New Age archetypes of this ball of radiant, all-loving light that just wants you to be at peace and accept everyone. And just know that there's no judgment. There's only love.
So the demons are really clever.
They're extremely.
They're playing
they've been
chess
playing
when
this
we're
game
playing
for
checkers.
at least 7,000 years, right?
They've got a head start
and they're
on us.
way more intelligent. Most of them, they're way more intelligent than humans. The most intelligent person you know is just a pipsqueak, a pinhead compared to the this more stupid demons.
So it's easy for them to trick us.
Yes,
into
very
thinking
easy.
we're some-
Yes.
So would a lot of cults or even some religions stem from people saying they saw angels or God appeared to them and told them to start this new thing? Would that be potentially demons
Yeah,
disguising
I mean,
themselves?
yeah, that's like the demon 101 game. Yeah, what the most powerful demons want. I mean, all demons do, but what the most powerful ones really want is to be worshipped as God. And this is the game they were playing on pagans since day one.
Is that you mentioned, I don't even know if this was in a podcast or off camera, you talked about Zeus.
Yes.
When Hank was here getting his tarot read, you explained that those were fallen angels that tricked people into
Yes.
worshiping
and
them.
again, you can read the book of Enoch for a lot on that. Also, I mean, I don't agree with everything they say, but the Ancient Faith podcast, Lord of Spirits, and they'll actually cite what they're going off of. I'm not really a citation person, but if you're more interested in this topic, I definitely recommend their podcast on demons because they go into a lot of detail. I mean, their podcasts are like 3 hours long.
Okay.
And they go into a lot of detail. And they're two priests. They're two Orthodox priests. And again, I don't agree with everything. And I was talking about my other demonology friend with this. And there's some things they say that are a bit weird, especially if you are Orthodox. For Orthodox priests, they say things that, like they say these Old Testament prophets aren't saints sometimes. And it's just like, okay, this is weird. But a lot of what they say on demons is definitely true. I agree
Okay.
with.
Well, yeah, and we've talked before about getting people who have seen them on the podcast, and we will eventually have a few of these people I know who have seen them. But it is very interesting that people would see them on North Campus.
Hmm.
because that is synonymous with the party part of campus where a lot of drugs are happening.
Well, I think there's other reasons
A-
too.
And the
I
what
mean, Lexington is a very occult place, and there's a variety of reasons for why that is, and it's too much to really go into here. And honestly, it would just sound too crazy to most of our viewers why that is.
okay.
So I'd rather not talk about it. But I will say Lexington is an occult hub,
Okay.
and the northern part of Lexington in particular, and also around Center Point,
Is that why there's so many shops?
occult shops,
Yeah.
a part of it.
Okay. Or so if someone says that, okay, so I guess the question would be, would the demons be at that area because of the occult shops, or would the
No,
occult shops be there because
more
of
so
the
that.
okay. Okay. It is interesting, yeah, because there are a
Yeah,
lot right there.
Lexington's occult legacy goes back way before metaphysical shops and the New Age and all of that. And the New Age was sort of a product of the human economy, CIA experiments, MK Ultra, Macy conferences, and then also actual demonic economy. So, I mean, a lot of that was programmed by humans and demons alike.
So what would be the best way to ward yourself against this if you don't want to be
Become
impacted?
Orthodox, go to confession, take Eucharist.
Okay.
I mean, I'm serious. I mean, even from a purely pragmatic, scientific point of view, which is to say, you do this, you get these results, right? To say nothing of metaphysics. That seems to work.
Even
I
if
don't
you don't
even think
really believe it,
yeah,
it works?
I think
Okay.
even if you don't believe it. And this is something that I've seen time and again, which is why I always say you don't have to be religious to be religious, right? I'm not religious. I've spoken about my sort of simultaneous metaphysical enthusiasm and intense skepticism, right? That I have this sort of paradoxical belief about reality, and I can entertain both simultaneously. But there definitely seems to be something going on. You know, let's say it's all purely psychological. It's all some sort of unconscious thing where you have all these self-imposed afflictions when you interact with these sort of projections of a superego or whatever you want to call it. And then for whatever reason, when you do religion, especially Orthodox religion, for whatever reason, then suddenly your unconscious calms down and you stop. Well, if nothing else, right? I mean, your alternative is taking so much psychiatrics, you basically cut off any real human aspect of yourself. And there's a reason that works too, but not in a good way. If you want to maintain your humanness, become Orthodox, at least Catholic. I don't know, but there's something about these rituals that all pagans have been doing, again, from a purely secular perspective, that puts your mind in a state where you're not in this constant ridden. If you're someone who doesn't believe in demons and you feel that you're haunted by spirits, try being Orthodox. Again, don't think, I know this sounds weird, but don't think you have to actually believe it. Just go. This is what the fathers even themselves say. Like, you know, just try it, see what happens. What does it do? It's sort of a Pascal's wager sort of thing. It's very scientific in the purest sense of the word. You try and you see what results you get.
Okay. And the last question, I guess, because we're closing in on the 50 minutes, you mentioned earlier people's sofas would be haunted or their bird. How would you know if something in your house
Right.
was haunted
Um,
or possessed?
well, there's usually giveaway signs like, for instance, a parrot. I think this is one my exorcist friend told me, the one who is not associated with the church. He said someone had a parrot, some occult person, and the parrot would say things in English, like just phrases like "Hello, how are you?" You know,
Hmm.
but then it starts to say some really weird stuff, and like it starts speaking other languages and stuff like that. So, you know, he was an occult person. He believed in spirits, and he was like, "All right, I think my spell or whatever, my ritual misfired." Or, so and demons don't always entirely have, especially lesser demons. They don't really have control over these things. Like, you do a ritual and you summon several demons. Like one just kind of like stray atom, just goes off and, lands in your parrot. Okay. So, or your blender or whatever. I mean, common household objects can get possessed,
Really?
but generally in that case, you have an actual haunted house situation. Like it's not going to, I've never really, I've heard of objects, relics getting possessed and the spirit sort of resides there, but household objects, it tends to go back from one to another. I've never heard of something mundane like a blender or a toaster and only that item being possessed. That doesn't, for whatever reason, that doesn't seem to be how demons work. But there are certain items, or usually religious items, that can be possessed, and the demon just sort of resides there. But with animals, humans, they tend to do the same thing. They just reside there for a while. And so you get these telltale signs, and you even have professional psychiatrists or therapists who work for the church who themselves aren't even religious. Their only job is saying, there is no psychosomatic reason why this person would be able to speak these foreign dead languages when they never have any prior education, right? And Freud even talks about this. Like there are real cases where you get people who seem to be hysterical in Freud's understanding, and they have all this esoteric knowledge of things. There's no reason out of nowhere. All of a sudden, no one in their family or friends know why they would say this. They go back and forth between the hypnotic states where there's no explanation for what's causing the hypnotism, what we would call, what Freud or psychiatrists of his day would call hypnotism. These states where they seem to be having this forbidden knowledge, I guess, for lack of a better word. Okay, so with animals or objects like that, just anything that's very strange and unexplainable. You can call an electrician, call a scientist, call a doctor, call a psychiatrist, and see if there's a scientific so-called explanation for it. Okay, and now a lot of times though they'll try to force one on it, which is why it's not entirely reliable. The test orthodox have traditionally done is that you hide an icon, a blessed icon, behind something, and you bring the possessed person into the room, and they start freaking out and uttering blasphemies. Then you probably have a possessed person because there's no way they can know that you're hiding something.
Yeah.
So the demon does, though. A demon doesn't work in that way. So that's usually how. That's like a litmus test.
Oh, so how would you test that with an object, even if it's bouncing into different objects? Would you like?
Well, if your toaster is like shaking up and down, right? If there's like no rational
Okay.
explanation for this, and
Okay.
this sort of stuff does happen. I mean, there's some Hollywood tropes that are totally made up, but there are ones that have a lot of truth to it. Like you see a poltergeist film, and there's like objects being flown around, cyclone of objects. This stuff is real. That
Okay.
happens, right? And it's actually very dangerous if you're doing exorcism. I mean, a lot of exorcists will actually have two very strong men come in to sort of hold a person down, and you can be physically injured in an exorcism if you're in the room or even in the house because there's objects flying, so or just going across the room, right? If you're having that situation, you probably have a demon, right?
Okay, yeah. So
And you need to get help.
if the toaster starts flying,
Yeah.
something's up. Okay. Wow. Okay.
But sometimes demons do work very subtly too. I mean, it's not their MO to go all out unless you're angering them. So they might just do something like your coffee maker stops working. Like my other demonologist, Nathan, like he suspected, I mean, which makes sense because he brings a lot of, I do too. I like to collect sort of possessed, haunted objects, right? Which is why I have so many icons, in holy water that I put on everything. Just in case. But he collects these artifacts, and his house started to seem to be showing signs of possession. But it was very mundane things like the toaster would stop working and all this other stuff. And he wasn't really sure. He thought maybe it was just weird or something. And he didn't actually call in the priest until his coffee maker stopped working. But it was all very much, I mean, there were weird stuff that would kind of make you think, but for the most part, it was very mundane things. And generally, that's probably how demons will work, especially with secular people. Again, they don't want you to believe in these things.
and he may
right?
not have realized it if he hadn't been a demonologist.
Yes.
They would have just continued to reside there.
Yeah. Until it gets worse and worse, and the demon starts to make them go crazy. I mean, if you ever read Edgar Allan Poe, like his works, they're a very accurate psychological reflection of someone who is haunted. I mean, literally in Poe's works by consciousness, but more metaphysically, I think by actual demonic entity.
Okay. Huh. Do you have anything in here right now that is haunted?
Well, I have these masks I collect from Africa. As far as I know, none of them were used in sacrificial rites. I did have a dagger that I stowed away somewhere because my exorcist friend I was talking about earlier told me to get rid of it, and I really liked it. He made me get rid of a lot of things I really was very attached to, and I really regret it. I had this like deer skull that someone just gave to me. I didn't know its origins, and I love to collect skull items. And he was like, "No, you have to destroy all these." And I really regret it now. I don't think I should have done it. But he told me to get rid of this dagger because it was a sacrificial dagger.
Where did you get the dagger?
My mother gave it to me as a gift when I was young. She would
Okay.
collect relics from Africa, like these fetishes I have.
So they're very authentic.
Yes,
And he said
yeah.
it was.
These are all from Africa.
And he said it was suspicious.
yeah. Well,
Okay.
it definitely had the design of a sacrificial fetish,
Okay.
and stuff like that aren't necessarily haunted, but they definitely can be.
High risk.
Yeah,
items.
and then I have that icon of Callie on top of her husband. I mean, it's probably not haunted, but the friend who gave it to me because it was starting to cause weird stuff in his.
What a nice
Oh,
friend.
yeah. Well, he knows I take stuff like
Okay,
that.
okay.
And he was pagan, so he didn't think he had the resources necessary to prevent whatever demonic energy might come from that.
Have you noticed anything from it since you
Nope.
got it?
And
Okay.
again, everything I bring in, I put holy oil, holy
Okay.
water on. So I really negate everything as much as I can. I put incense everywhere. And, even these pagan customs, I don't think they're arbitrary because they were practiced all over the world, like putting salt around a room, sage. Like, I think this stuff works. It maybe doesn't work as well as holy water or holy oil. But I think God imbues, this is basically what alchemy is. Like, we in the natural world have forgotten all these things, but we think of things as purely chemical, material properties. But there are spiritual properties to items, to salt, to sage, to herbs. That's what a lot of herbology is that has been forgotten nowadays that only your great, 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 great grandmother knew about. And
Yeah.
there are aspects of these herbs and natural resources like salt and sage that actually have effects of warding off demonic energy.
When I went to the supernatural shop, is that what it's called?
Metaphysical shop, yeah.
Metaphysical shop to get the tarot cards for the podcast. They had a lot of crystals, obviously, and a lot of them said that they ward off negative spirits and energy. Is there truth to that?
So I think we talked about this in another podcast,
Yeah.
but my point is, like, I'm generally skeptical of whatever New Age stuff ascribes to rocks or crystals or any of this stuff. I think they definitely have. Again, I think every element, every natural resource has metaphysical, spiritual qualities, but I only trust traditions that are like 2,000 year old. Like, if
Okay.
an old Chinese woman who seems to genuinely be connected to Taoist, tradition about these alchemical properties of substances, I believe that. Especially insofar that always ends up coinciding with all these other 2,000-year-old traditions halfway across the world. Like,
There's a reason.
there's
for
a
that.
reason,
It
right?
survived.
Whereas, like, most of these descriptions from New Age stuff tends to sort of just happen to appear in the 60s, and I can't usually trace it to older things.
It's just a way to sell rocks.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's this say, like, I think rocks do have properties that are not in our modern idea of it scientifically observable. But I don't really trust whatever a New Age metaphysical shop says they are.
All right. So that is the end of the 50 minutes. Do you have any closing comments?
Yeah. Also, I'd recommend checking out Malachi Martin, who is a Jesuit priest, probably assassinated, probably by Jesuits. But he was the chief demonologist and exorcist of the Catholic Church during Pope Paul VI. He was also one of the few people who knew about the actual third secret of Fatima. But he did a series of talk shows on a sort of New Age occult radio show. I think it was called Coast to Coast or something like that. And he did a series of talks here and there. And again, I don't agree with everything he says, but he's very informative and he's a very good storyteller.
All right.
So if you're interested in this, in addition to Seraphim Rose and Lord of Spirits podcast on ancient faith, I'd also recommend Malachi Martin. And all his stuff is on YouTube.
All right. We can try to link some of that in the description.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we will see you next week.
All right. See you next week.